Welcome to the Goalie Hacks Podcast, the show dedicated to providing elite tips, hacks, and strategies to take your game to the next level, where we help you become an elite goaltender, one hack at a time. And now, here's your host, Mike Santaguida.
Bang, bang. Welcome back to the show. Man, do we have an absolutely fire episode for you in store this week. We got Mark Stephenson, the Director of Player Performance for the NFL's Detroit Lions, on the show. And I was so pumped with the way the conversation went. You guys are going to love this one. Mark is a super off-the-radar kind of guy, but incredibly intelligent when it comes to maximizing athletic performance and recovery. He's worked with several Division I hockey teams, the U.S. National Strength and Conditioning Association, the Navy SEALs, and eventually moved on to work with the Detroit Lions in the NFL the last 2 seasons. We dive deep into strength and conditioning work relating to high-performance athletes and how you can get an edge on the ice. Mark's motto is recover smarter so you can train harder, and I know you guys won't be disappointed with the episode today. Shout out to my newest patron, Sawyer Russell, hailing from St. Stephen, New Brunswick, out in Eastern Canada. Sawyer approached me about a month ago trying to take his game to the next level and to provide him with some career guidance. We've recently started to discuss his options going forward, and I'm happy to welcome him into my inner circle and to anoint him as a true hacker in the Goalie Hacks ecosystem. I'm looking forward to helping catapult his development and to put him on the appropriate track to help him reach his long-term goals of playing professional hockey one day. If you're interested in working much closer with me and getting the cheat codes to take your game to the next level, to get your foot in the door, to work on some recruiting, figure out a career path, for just a few bucks a month, you can become a member of my inner circle and join my mentorship program where I offer tons of extra benefits to my community members in exchange for their support. Either hit me up directly or head to my page at patreon.com/goaliehacks, included in the show notes, for more details on how to get started. If you guys haven't seen yet, I just released a 16-page ebook breaking down one of the main pillars of my success over my career and one tool that you can add to your toolbox to give you an edge over the competition on the ice. So head to my website at goaliehacks.com to register to get this completely free resource and one of the biggest secrets of my career sent right to your inbox instantly, as this is just one piece of completely free exclusive content out of many free ebooks I will be releasing for months to come. Shout out to our main sponsor, NeuroTracker. And if you guys are looking for more info on the experience people are having, just head to my Instagram page and check out the NeuroTracker story highlights and see for yourself what people are saying. If you're interested in getting started or want more details, whether you're a player or coach, younger or older, definitely send me a direct message on Instagram today after this episode to get the full details on what exactly we've been doing. To kick off our sponsorship, we're giving away a free subscription for the new NTX product, not available to the public yet, so stick around to the end of the show to get details on how to enter into this weekly giveaway. Without further ado, let's get into this week's episode. I know you guys are going to love the chat Mark and I had today. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the Goalie Hacks Podcast. I couldn't be happier today to be joined by Mark Stephenson, who's currently working with the NFL's Detroit Lions as the Director of Player Performance and also working with the Rockefeller Neuroscience Institute on sleep and recovery. Mark has an extensive background working with athletes at the next level, as well as high-performance individuals in the military, including the Navy SEALs. After an internship at Holy Cross, he started as the men's hockey strength and conditioning coach at Providence College back in '96, eventually adding women's hockey before becoming the head strength coach for all sports. In 2004, he joined the Colorado College Tigers as the men's hockey head strength and conditioning coach. And during his time with Colorado, he was also the Human Performance Center director of the National Strength and Conditioning Association. He then moved on to work as the Director of Human Performance for the U.S. Navy SEALs for 8 years in Colorado Springs before beginning his work as the Director of Player Performance with the Detroit Lions back in 2018. Mark, how you doing, sir? Thanks for coming on the show.
Oh, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, it's nice to meet you, buddy. And shout out to Dr. Len Zykowski from episode 6 for hooking me up with Mark. And Mark, thanks again for coming on the show as well. You know, when I saw your pictures, I just imagine you being like a super jack guy that used to lift and be super into working out. Was lifting and athletic performance sort of a hobby of yours growing up?
Actually, it wasn't. I didn't get into it until after high school. more on the Olympic lifting side. So it was
Right on.
it was really a change for me, for sure. I was always a husky kid, though.
That's all right. Well, I was happy to hear that your main focus is sleep. And we talked a bit prior to this recording, but I personally have a keen interest in sleep and how it affects performance. And all my listeners will know, they know that I've talked about it on other podcasts, and I've brought it up relatively often. And it's sort of been an area that has been gone unscathed. People sort of don't really know what to say. And I've been looking forward to this one for a while. Someone who's a sleep and recovery expert, basically, right? So, um, you know, maybe we could just start off by briefly telling my audience a bit about yourself. Where you've been and the work you've done.
Sure, yeah. Started out a long, long time ago, about 31 years ago in
Nice.
this profession. But basically, I started out as an athletic trainer working in a clinic, doing rehabilitation. Uh, there, I was exposed to, obviously, from the sports injury side and working with some high schools, but I was exposed to some professional athletes that after their rehab, and they were local, after their rehab, just continue on doing strength and conditioning. So I really got the bug of actually doing strength and conditioning performance versus rehab. So I slowly transitioned into that realm, and that led me to a good opportunity with the College of Holy Cross in Worcester, and a friend of mine, Jeff Oliver, had become the head strength coach there, and just gave me an opportunity to get in there and learn how to work with teams. In rehab, you work with individuals, so it's a whole different perspective. From there, just started moving on to working with obviously. I'm from Rhode Island and the New England area, so hockey's our big thing here.
Yeah.
Had some great mentors growing up in the profession, with likes of Mike Boyle and Vern Gambetta, and just progressed from there. And, got into Providence College, working with their hockey program over the years. Took on men's and women's hockey, and then eventually, like you said, became head strength coach. But then I had an opportunity to leave, which was really hard because it was such a good program at Providence. They treated me very, very well.
Hmm.
But to go to Colorado Springs, work at the National Strength and Conditioning Association, which included working with Colorado College men's hockey, as well as the Broadmoor Figure Skating Club. So it was kind of like, oh, I got to do
Nice.
hockey and figure skating, which was a challenge in itself. Uh, but during my time, working with those folks, learning, it really came down to, and I'll get more into this, but into analyzing performance. So how do I address the needs of a figure skater, a pairs figure skater, an ice dancer versus you know a winger or a goalie, in hockey,
Yeah.
and really get into it. So it took a lot of analyzing and so forth. Of course, being at the National Strength and Conditioning Association, that's the flagship. So I had access to a ton of exceptional resources and researchers and coaches out in the community. So that really developed me big time there, for sure.
Yeah.
And then I'll talk a little bit about going into the tactical world, because there was a crossover with that, working with Colorado Springs Police SWAT, which they came to us to say, hey, we test these folks. What are we looking for? Is this test valid? Things like that.
Yeah.
As we got into it, that was the easy part from one standpoint. But as we got into it, we learned, like, the movements are similar, but the outcomes are different, things like that. So we started developing programs, strength and conditioning programs with them, and took them on a daily basis. And then eventually turned into really looking deep into what it takes to be that type of a police officer.
Hmm.
At the same time, somebody from 10th Special Forces Group at Fort Carson, which was right outside the door from us as well, was a Nebraska grad, participated in track and field in Nebraska, And the founder of the NSCA was from Nebraska, Boyd Epley. So he was familiar with the organization, popped over. Then we took his team in and we started training them. So that's how the tactical part started.
Yeah.
And I was split between the two, hockey and tactical. But then I had this opportunity I couldn't refuse, working with one of the special mission units in the Navy SEALs. So that's when I, uprooted there and moved my family to Virginia Beach, and worked there. And then that's where the research really started developing and coming in, where we looked at sleep and recovery and so forth. And then again, a friend of mine, who was previously a defensive coordinator for the New England Patriots, uh, earned the job at Detroit Lions as the head coach, and asked me to join him in 2018. I joined him. So the past 2 seasons, I've been with the Detroit Lions as the director of player performance. This season, I've transitioned a little bit because I want to get back into the military, and the Detroit Lions organization has been exceptional, from the head coach, the GM, to the Ford family, and allowed me to actually work remotely, focus on the sports science for them, and be able to give my time working with the military through the Rockefeller Neuroscience Institute. So that kind of takes us up to where I am today.
So I'm just curious, what did you love so much about the strength and conditioning side of athletics over the rehab side so much? How come you wanted to get into it more?
The way I really transitioned was, now don't get me wrong, rehab is great. You see, you get these injured folks, from athletes to regular folks, and you get them better, and that's satisfactory. But what I saw working with athletes on the strength and conditioning side and the performance side was it's somewhat, nobody's at the top yet, right? We're, as a human being, we're trying to get there, and
Right.
it just really amazed me on how resilient and adaptable the human body is, and how you push it in different ways, and as I learned more, academically and experience wise, it just became more fascinating and fascinating. So I got more satisfaction of doing that, of trying to improve performance. So that's really where I kind of transitioned from the rehab to the just the main performance side of the house.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I want to sort of start maybe right from the beginning. Go right into your time at Providence, and you mentioned prior to the call that you focused on being the best conditioned team because those teams typically in the third period usually have better outcomes. I was just curious, do you still think to this day that that philosophy holds true?
Well, I do, because the game is 3 periods, right? So I mean, for the most part, that third period can be a very determining period for the outcome of a game.
Mm-hmm.
And so, my time at Providence, when I got to Providence, I had a head coach who was very cerebral, and it was Paul Pooley, and he was amazing in the way he thought about things, which connected with me because that's kind of the way I looked at things. So we would sit down and discuss different things that he saw, that I saw, from a performance standpoint, physical standpoint. And traditionally, hockey was go out, run 5 miles, for your conditioning and so forth. And that this was mid 90s, where it was like, well, VO2 versus no VO2 type training, aerobic and anaerobic. And as we started breaking things down, we worked more on the anaerobic side, which at the beginning I thought was, okay, we got to attack that. And so we were able to increase our speed on the ice, and so forth, over some time, a couple of years. But then, not realizing the way we condition them in those short terms, we actually improve their VO2. So nowadays we know that we can improve VO2 through high intensity training. Back then, it was just either you ran long distance or you didn't do it. So, uh, uh, but it came to a point where, I'll be honest with you, I forget what
Mm-hmm.
season it was. It was maybe second, third season I was there. It was after the season. We sat down, Coach Pooley and I, and he's like, "Hey, listen, I get, because we were still doing the 5 mile, but then it was an event versus a test. But he's like, hey, I get it, but I need them to be better at the 5 mile.
Yeah.
Okay, so he's the head coach, and then his second statement to me was, I need them to be faster. So I was like, okay. I said, and then I explained to him the physiology. I was like, we can get faster, we can get better at the 5 mile, but we can't do both effectively. How, what's more important to you?
Yeah.
And, long story short, it really came down, hey, I want them faster. But then we increased our interval intensity training to accomplish the fitness level that we were getting from the 5 mile, and then getting the speed and the reaction and
Yeah.
short change of direction that we wanted from the speed work. So, and it wasn't overnight. Obviously, this was trial and error, learning from other people,
Yeah.
gaining more experience. But over time, and then we found that we were better conditioned than most teams in the third period, and for the most part, and that's when our success started improving from there. When I went to Colorado College, now we're on an Olympic sheet,
Right.
so big difference for working it. But I still went with that philosophy. So working with Coach Owens at the time,
Yeah.
he was all about it, and we really focused on that, and we saw success with being better conditioned than most of our opponents in the third period. So I still believe that's true, but I also believe a lot of teams are doing that. So at some point, it becomes an equalizer.
Yeah. So what exactly did that look like where, because obviously two kind of different types of heart variability, right? The 5 mile versus short and quick.
Right.
What exactly did you guys do to sort of accomplish both?
So we really shifted, especially by the time I got to Colorado College. We shifted to more high intensity interval training in the conditioning realm, not necessarily in the weight room. But so today it seems like everybody's doing it anyway, so you already know. But back then we weren't doing a lot of that, on field work,
Yeah.
and then we focused more on things that they would do pertaining to the ice. So our agility drills would be distance and mimic more of what they would do for close quarter. And then when we transferred on the ice, we still did that. So we did conditioning on the ice that resembled that, work to rest ratios, and so forth. And to a point where at Colorado, we were able to, use heart rate monitors and stuff on the ice. And, I had access to better technology by that time.
Yeah.
So basically, we went with that concept of, interval training to improve VO2 and fitness levels. Because at the end of the day, it does come true that a higher VO2, a higher fitness level you have, the better both in speed, recovery, and performance you'll be able to do. But how you get that fitness level doesn't necessarily mean you have to go out and run 5-6 miles unless that's your sport.
Yeah. Yeah, it's I love how you keep bringing up the term VO2 just because honestly I don't think it gets talked about enough, and I actually just released an entire ebook on sort of the type of training that I would do on the ice for goalies to increase your VO2 max, right? And that was sort of an area that I tune in on back when I was over 10 years ago. I'm 27 now, so that was 11 years ago. And it's sort of something that I used to help me slow the game down, and something I used that me and my dad would talk about. Same thing. In the third period, that's where most people fail. Everybody's good when they're fresh, right?
Right.
But how sharp are you come that third period when everybody's tired? Everybody's been playing a 60-minute game, right?
Yep.
Um, but pertaining specifically to conditioning regarding a player versus goaltender, should goalies be doing different kinds of conditioning work over players, and what exactly would that look like?
Well, the foundation is similar. They don't have to do necessarily everything different.
Yeah.
But when we start getting down to the close, we call close-sided drills, the cone drills and stuff, that's where it differs, because we want to start them to mimic movements that they're going to more likely do. So goaltender versus a centerman, it's going to be a big difference on how they do
Yeah.
things. So we would split up at that point, but some of the tempo-based type of running or sprinting, would be similar as everybody else. But when it came to on ice, then that's obviously it was a lot different because we really closed off and just their work to rest ratio was different because they're not playing shifts.
Yeah.
So can we mimic a barrage? As far as time goes, things of that nature. So it's really breaking down, not necessarily the game, but also the individual. So so we can get more precise to the goaltenders we have. What type of goaltender are they? What type of body type? So it's more specific to them. Now with goalies, it's easier because you only have a couple of them versus 20 something players. But so it is a little bit different. But VO2 is VO2, right? So you both need it.
Yeah.
Just how you get it would be a little different.
Yeah.
The other thing I'd like to even just jump on that VO2, like you said, when you get tired, everybody's tired, you get sharper. But it's the mental component, right?
Yeah.
And especially it's for everybody, decision making. But goaltenders, if they're fatigued and tired, they're also mentally fatigued and tired.
Yeah.
So VO2 helps delay that central nervous system fatigue as well.
Yeah, I love that. I love that you just said that because I had been doing a lot of research a long time ago, and it basically was stating that when you're under either physical or emotional stress, the prefrontal cortex, which is the area associated with decision making, actually sort of gets interrupted or cut off from the rest of the brain, and that's sort of why, from my understanding, is why people make mistakes. Like people, oh, why did I let that go in? Oh, I don't know how I did that. Is that sort of accurate what I'm alluding to?
Yeah, it is. We call it amygdala hijacking because the amygdala will start taking over and it won't let the information go anywhere. And it will say, I'm in charge now. So we're just going to react.
Wow.
And so that's when poor decision making starts happening because now it's emotional decision making.
Yeah.
Instead of that executive function, like you were talking about with that prefrontal cortex.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I'm incredibly, I'm already loving the way this conversation's going.
I'm sorry, I'd be remiss if I didn't tell you that there was a time, probably in the 90s, that I was anti VO2 for hockey.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like there's obviously a lot of strength coaches were like that, and I was like, yeah, this doesn't make sense. We're not endurance, come on, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And so listen, I've learned from mistakes. I wasn't, it took a long time to get where I'm at, and it took a lot of
Yeah.
experience and trial and error.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's good. So why initially were people so against that? Maybe you can dive a bit into where we were then versus where we are now with what we know.
Well, I think a lot of the work done in the literature at that time, one was done on marathon runners, or
Right.
triathletes, and everybody was equating VO2. We all were equating VO2 with athletes because that's what the norms were on. And then, maybe we do VO2 testing for our hockey players on a bike or whatever, but well, we're not skating where it doesn't matter. Or, I don't know that. I think a lot of strength coaches at that time were more of the power, including myself. So listen, I'm a big, heavy guy. I'm not running, a marathon. So, nobody else should, that type of thing. So we had that mentality, and it's the weight room. It's this, it's that. And, again, we've evolved from a profession as well, but I think that was part of it.
Yeah.
And I think just there's so much emphasis in the 80s and 90s on long distance running triathlons that as, a power sport, like whether it's football or hockey, just want to separate ourselves from that. And I think that's my opinion. I think that's how we kind of were against it in that sense.
Yeah. Well, I think just like anything, science has come a long way in the last 30 years, even in the last 10 years, right? So,
Yeah, I mean, because the only way we could do VO2 was you got to go out and run, 10, 12 miles.
right.
And so that just, counterproductive for what we're trying to do in hockey. So we were
Yeah.
just, it's anti VO2 versus anti long distance running.
Yeah. Yeah. No, definitely understand. Well, you head to Colorado College and you sort of got into it a little bit, but during your time there, you had an opportunity to work with the National Strength and Conditioning Association. What was probably the biggest surprise during your years there?
I, I think, I was afforded a lot more resources. So
Yeah.
it opened my eyes to a lot of different views. And, I would interact with a lot of different professionals, um, from great, researchers, but they were great in their area,
Yeah.
right? So I would pick from each different area and I learn and try to apply some stuff and somewhat create my own way to do it and using other people's concepts and ideas. And I think the biggest surprise for me was how resilient the body is
Yeah.
as human beings, as a species, that we can endure a lot more than we give ourselves credit for. So, I mean, I think that was the biggest eye opener there, and the biggest opportunity for me was just being allowed to interact with those people and those people sharing their experiences and their research with me.
Yeah. Yeah, I like how you said that, how, resilient the body is. And I don't know if you've ever read the book Peak by Anders Ericsson. Have you ever heard of that?
Yes, yes, yeah. I've
Yeah.
read that, and yeah, I- he's that's a great foundational premise right there. He gives a
Yeah.
good look at that, in my
Yeah.
opinion.
The gift of he talks about this gift that as people, as humans, we have something in us called homeostasis, which is the tendency to want to be at your equilibrium. But he also talks about how we have this gift of adaptability, and it's sort of what you're alluding to there, how resilient the body is. And when we sort of bend the body, put stress on it, the body adapts and rebuilds in a way so that way, when we come across that challenge again, it can overcome it. And I think that people at home, and a lot of, we sort of hit that wall of, like, when we're doing, sprints or whatever it is, we're on that sixth or seventh round of suicide runs. That's when you slow down, when really that's when you're hitting your peak. And the harder you drive through that, and the further you go, and the more attention to detail you have, when you're sort of hit that total fatigue level, you're showing your body and your brain that it can go there. And when you go there, it makes those adjustments and adapts to get there. Does that sort of make sense?
It does, because I guarantee when everybody's at that sixth, seventh rep of that sprint, that they're just dragging and everybody's kind of slowing
Yeah.
down, like, oh, they're just fatigued. I guarantee if somebody blew an air horn behind you and you weren't looking, you'd have the energy. So yeah, you mentally you're quitting. Your body isn't quitting. You think it is, and that will that's basically how they view it when you go to special forces training, whether it's Navy SEALs or Ranger or Green Beret or whatever. It's showing you have more in the tank. You just got to believe that.
Yeah. Yeah. And we'll get more into that a bit later. But because you were in Colorado, you started working in Colorado Springs in the tactical world with SWAT officers on call. What was maybe the biggest aha moment for you while you were studying those officers?
Well, I, I th- I think the biggest thing that really kind of launched me into the direction was, as we've done a lot of things, strength and conditioning program for them, and obviously they got better because they didn't have the resources before. So, that's an easy win. Um, and we reduced their workers' comp dramatically because they got fitter. But aside from that, I mean, we knew that was going to happen.
Yeah.
But as we got into the heart rate variability stuff on my end, um, as we had them wired up as they were out on their calls, whether it's serving a warrant or a drug bust or whatever. And it was funny because you have a lieutenant in charge that's not in the van with them. He's
Right.
obviously over there, but then there's a sergeant in charge of the team that's in the van, in the stack, and making the final call. And they had two sergeants, but only one is in the role of sergeant, at a time.
Yeah.
So looking at that, we could see, from experienced SWAT officers to lesser experienced SWAT officers, heart rates change. They were lower in the more experienced, as you would expect.
Yeah.
But it was the sergeants. When they were acting as the sergeant, their heart rate was a lot higher during the event.
Yeah.
When the event finished, they dropped down low pretty good. But when they weren't the sergeant, they were just in the stack. They were like at a low heart rate for them,
Yeah.
and that proved over and over, with them switching on and off. So that was pretty interesting at that point. And of course, the technology wasn't even up and running very well back then either. So but that's what we had and we could look at. But that prompted me to look further into different things. Especially when I got to the Navy SEALs,
Yeah.
where we really started looking at the brain as part of this whole process.
Yeah. Now, how exactly do you think that, sort of translates to sports and what that means for athletes?
Well, I mean, it translates easily in that sense because looking at performance is performance,
Yeah.
right? So you have to, you know, like in hockey, you have, your performance on the ice. If you're a defenseman or a forward or a winger or whatever your position is, or in separately a goaltender. So you can calculate your performance based on certain things there. Um, so in different sports, you have some metrics or statistics that help you. In the tactical world, they don't have that. But what happens is, like so the translation is really during the time of the competition. That alone is, are you too stressed? Are you stressed enough
Mm,
or aroused enough to perform?
yeah.
And then afterwards, can you come down? So, like if you're, a defenseman, when you get off the ice and you're sitting on the bench waiting for your next shift, can your body, as you said before, can we get back to your baseline before you go back on for your next shift?
Right. Right.
So, that's where it translates into sports.
Right. Right. And now, after your work with, in Colorado with SWAT officers, you moved on to working with the Naval Special Warfare, which is the Navy SEALs, and that must have been just an incredible experience. And you talked about things like better recovery means better game readiness, and you were tasked with trying to figure out, how to sustain these guys for long periods of time. So, what were some of your first findings surrounding around recovery and why proper recovery is so important?
Well, at that time, as we were looking, at things like you said, the mission task was how do we sustain these operators for a long period of time? How do we get from 5 years to 15 years? Because unlike sports, it's a longer period of time. But if I train you up to be this special operator, the investment financially is tremendous, right?
Right.
And if you leave in 5 years, I can't get that back. So what it happens, and if you look at the whole process of becoming an expert and so forth, it takes a lot of time on task to become an expert. So in the SEAL community, they figure it's an average of about 5 years before you really become a full-on expert and then moving on.
Yeah.
Um, same in, like in SWAT, 4 to 5 years, depending on how much exposure time on task you have. So if you leave at 5 years, I'm starting over every time. So I'm
Hmm.
never really getting that expertise, and I'm not, um, from a taxpayer standpoint, we're not getting our money's worth.
Yeah.
So how do we extend that life because I don't have to replace you right away, and
Right.
then you can pass on your experience to that next expert coming up, and they become a better expert, and so on and so on. So the plan of succession. So that was kind of how we had to look at it, and we're looking at strength and conditioning because that's where we lived, and it's and if you look back, I mean, there's nothing new in strength and conditioning over the past, whatever century. I mean, it's gravity and physics. So, you
Yeah.
know, that's the easy part. But what we found was like, and believe me, it's not like we're so smart. We found this, we found that. I'll tell you exactly the first time was I had one, SEAL come to me and say, hey, when I was in Buds, this was a very experienced SEAL at the time. So he was in Buds a long time ago.
Yeah.
And he's like, I used to go to this place and float, on my own on the weekends to recover. And it worked really well. We should be looking at that. And I'm like, this is because, everybody comes up with all these things. I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
you're kidding me. So, all right, but that's my job, right? So, start looking at it. It's like, looking at the empirical research, not the
Yeah.
marketing stuff. And this is probably 2000 and I don't know, 10 maybe.
Yeah.
And then we said, okay, we'll buy a couple. And just for guys to use, we still weren't looking at that. And
Yeah.
then guys started reporting that, hey, you know what? I slept 8 hours last night. Now, the average sleep time for that community in special operations, whether it's the SEALs or Green Berets or Rangers or Marines, it's really about 4 hours. And we
Wow.
don't even know if that's even quality sleep.
Oh my
Uh,
goodness.
it's just high stress environment and high
Yeah.
pace environment. Well, these guys are saying like 6 8 hours of sleep they're getting and so forth. So we started looking into a little bit deeper. It's like, hey, we need to look at this. What's happening in the body? So we started exploring what's really happening physiologically. Then then we looked at the psyche and so forth over the years. And of course, we had employed other experts to help us with the Air Force Research Lab and
Yeah.
DARPA and other government agencies to help us start looking in that area. And what we found was, from a recovery standpoint, um, because again, the biggest measure for us is heart rate variability, which measures our autonomic nervous system,
Yeah.
sympathetic, parasympathetic. So that was telling us that they were getting back to balance. So we looked at other, technologies, some good, some worked, some didn't work, and we're continuing looking into them that way. From the light therapy, the near infrared light therapy, to
Yeah.
cryostim and blood flow restriction, things like that. There's a lot of stuff out there, and we're just continuing looking into it.
Yeah. And how effective do you think? Because I mean, I haven't done the cryo, but there are some other things that I've done. I've done like a hyperbaric chamber, which has worked, which honestly was worked really good for me when I was playing pro in Tennessee the last couple of years. We had access to one, and I would, it's, and you talk about sleep and sort of the quality of sleep and stuff like that. We would get back from road trips at like 4:30 a.m. and you didn't really get to sleep on the bus until 2, and then next thing you know, it's Monday morning and you only got like 6 8 hours of sleep or something like that. So I would need to go to the chamber to sort of replenish that oxygen, and it would pick me up right away. It would get rid of that sort of that run down feeling that you get when you don't get good sleep. And it's affected me more into my older age as well. But how effective do you think that some of these modalities are, like cryo and hyperbaric and stuff like that?
Well, some of them are very effective. Some are not as effective. And when we look at what we call apparently healthy individuals, like the scenario that you talked about,
Yeah.
um, you know, hockey and basketball are really difficult, especially in the pro level because of the back-to-back travel. And you play at night. that's not your body's circadian rhythm, right?
Yeah.
So we're asking to go to bed, at 1 a.m. instead of 9 p.m. You know what I mean? So there's a lot of different things. So things like flow, the hyperbaric chamber and stuff, are effective with those things. There's not a lot of literature on the hyperbaric chamber for recovery
Yeah.
in that realm. There's good on like bone healing,
Mm.
tissue repair, burns, things like that, but not on apparently healthy individuals.
Mm.
So we're still looking into that. The one caution with the hyperbaric is there are um, indicators that would say you shouldn't use it because it could be dangerous.
Mm.
Uh,
Why
versus
is
some of
that?
the other ones, there's not a lot of contraindications.
Why is that?
So, yeah, so you just have to look at the modality, what the contraindications are, and make sure you don't have them. And some devices don't have any, or very little contraindications. Um, but it's not to say that you shouldn't use it. It's just you
Yeah.
just need to be more vigilant about what you do and how you use it,
Yeah. Yeah.
things like that. But they can be very, very effective. It's again, it's a biohack, if you will.
Yeah.
And if we can't get it, I can't tell you, hey, it's after a game, you're riding in a bus. Okay, you need to go get 8 hours, 9 hours of sleep, and you just do the sleep hygiene stuff. That's not going to work because
Mm.
we've already thrown you off your circadian rhythm and all that stuff. So you might need those interventions.
Yeah.
Now, it doesn't mean you always should use interventions, but in this case, you don't have another option.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, for people at home, maybe avoiding proper recovery or maybe don't have access to some of these modalities, what does sort of proper recovery look like to you after a workout or a game or whatever you're doing that causes stress? What do you suggest, people do to be as efficient as possible with their recovery to help them be better performers?
Well, I'll tell you the no cost solution to that.
Yeah.
People aren't really. It's not exciting, but mindfulness, meditation,
Mm,
things like that have been proven time and time again in the literature. As unsexy as it is,
yeah.
it works, and it's not costing you anything. Now, what I will tell you, it is a skill, right? I can't just say, "Hey, go meditate," and you go, "All right, I'll meditate." But there's different ways to meditate,
Yeah.
if you will, that you can do right away. So, and I'll give you an example that everybody knows, they just might not associate with. It's like, hey, I just want to put my headphones on. I want to listen to my music. What happens when you listen to that music?
Yeah.
you know. And if it's before a competition, you probably have a different genre of music that you listen to. But if it's afterwards, what music that you enjoy that gets you relaxed? That's a start. That's a no cost, solution. Um, and then if you can meditate or mindfulness, being in that moment, reflection, self reflection, could be reflection of the competition, all that stuff. That is helpful, and it does help promote better quality sleep as well. But it's not a light switch. You're not going to turn that on and then
Yeah.
everything hunky dory. For some people, it could be you do that while you're stretching. You can do it while you're doing some other things, but it gets your brain into that mindfulness state where
Mhm.
meditation becomes more effective. And for some people, if they're religious, they could pray because that is a form of meditation as well.
Mm.
So there's different ways you can go about it. What's good for you? If I tell you like, hey, just go and do a mantra, om, and things like that, you might
Yeah.
be like, screw that. I don't. That doesn't work.
I
If
think
you
a
put
lot of people are like that, right?
Right, but you put headphones on and listen to, whatever. I'll date myself and say ACDC, but that might relax.
Well, what kind of effect does that have? Because I actually personally, I stumbled upon when I was in university at the University of Vermont. We worked with a sports psychologist, and he sort of introduced me to meditation. And I think everybody's sort of got to find their happy medium with the practice a bit. And obviously, like you said, it's a skill that you need to work on. But what kind of effect does that have? Like, what does the literature sort of say about, I guess, what the numbers say of how effective that is in terms of recovery?
Well, I mean, the there's a lot of good literature out there on the effectiveness of meditation from chronic um, conditions, especially, obviously it's more, you find more of that literature in the psychology realm, but, anxiety, depression, you know, things like even disease states like pain, like with rheumatoid arthritis, MS or things like that. So it's shown a lot of effectiveness in what we call perceived, uh, like a perceived scale. Like I feel better, when they do
Mm,
these visual analog testing, they all perform better for the most part.
yeah, yeah. Well, now you've been working with the Detroit Lions, since 2018. And when it comes to sports science and performance, what is probably the most effective thing that you've implemented with the team that those guys are doing at the next level to stay ahead of the competition?
I think the most effective thing we were able to do when the new regime came in there under Coach Patricia, because he's a big proponent of this type of stuff. And when I was at the command with the Navy SEALs, we had a leadership exchange with a few teams, and New England being one of them. And so they were able to take on some of those recovery things, um, and start experimenting with them at New England. So when Matt came over to take over at the Detroit Lions, he wanted to bring that plus. So the biggest thing we were able to do for those players was we built an actual recovery suite that we had float tanks, we had the near infrared light therapy, we had the cryo,
Nice.
the cold tubs, hot tubs, we had in-house massage therapy and stretch therapy, all in the suite,
Yeah.
including the traditional Normatex,
Yeah.
E-stim, and all that stuff. But we contained it in one area and also gave them the resources and opportunity to use them throughout the day and night.
Hmm. Yeah. That's obviously those are some big buck modality items, right? Sort of
Yeah.
tough for but I'm just curious, should hockey players and football players be recovering differently, or sport to sport is recovery relatively consistent with what works best regarding rolling out and stretching and some things like that are free for people to use?
Yeah, I think one of the traditional things for hockey is the ice plunge, right?
Yeah.
Um, what I can tell you about that is, especially for hockey specifically. So one of the things that the ice plunge does from the brain standpoint is it actually induces what we call the parasympathetic state, that relaxation state. So I know when you're in there, you're like, oh,
Really? Does it really?
right. It's amazing because you would think the opposite.
Oh yeah, I certainly do. I do them often. I did them like every day in college, ice bath.
Yeah, and I would argue with because I'm an athletic trainer by trade,
Yeah.
as even before I became a strength coach. But even with the trainers, they're like, oh, there's no research that this really works, and blah blah, and it's an anti-inflammatory. Well, we don't want to call it like so. Yeah, but it works. And when we find out now, the research is there. When we measure the autonomic nervous system through heart rate variability, we're
Yeah.
finding out that it actually promotes a parasympathetic state.
Wow.
And so to that point, even though it was traditionally done, it's still a very effective tool
Yeah.
that is a low cost because you can fill up the tub at the hotel and throw
Yeah.
ice in it, or something like that.
Yeah.
Now, but to your question specifically, no, it depends on your performance, right?
Mhm.
So, I want you should recover after you perform, whether it's training or competition. How long, how much, and what modality that could depend. I mean, if you're a defenseman that you know whatever has to do more shifts than normal because of, something in the game,
Yeah.
penalties or whatever, you know, if you have a game where you're on the, you know, if you're on the power play, your forwards and stuff might have to do more recovery. But
Right.
on the opposite end, if you're giving up a lot and you're always on the man down situation, then your defenseman might have to do a lot more strategic recovery after a game, or if it's an overtime period.
Yeah.
So situational will dictate that. But as far as performance is performance, right? So if your perceived exertion is high, then you need to address that with more recovery.
Yeah. And what do you think is probably, working with the lines, the most common misconception that amateur athletes have regarding strength and conditioning and recovery that the pros understand just a lot better?
But the biggest thing is mindset.
Mhm.
It's a mindset. It's not about going and lifting weights. It's not about going and doing conditioning to be better at on the field or whatever. It's just part of the game, or it's not about like, oh, now I got to do this for recovery because it's on my checklist.
Yeah.
It's the mindset of I need not just take care of my body. It's about sustainment. How long can I have a career? When
Mhm.
you are an amateur athlete, your career never ends. When you're a professional athlete, you only have X number of years
Yeah.
to make your to succeed and make your money. Right?
Yeah.
That's your employment. That's going to go away real quick, no matter how good you are, right? Some can make it a lot longer, which is great, but in the grand scheme of things, they're not out there for 20, 30 years
Yeah.
as an athlete.
Yeah.
So, most of the time, like in the NFL, I mean, if you make your second contract, you're about 4 years that you're going to be able to really make your mark, maybe 8 years.
Mm-hmm.
For the most part, on the average.
Yeah.
Same with hockey. I mean, you're up and down, and you could be gone tomorrow.
Yeah.
So your availability is your biggest asset, because I don't care how good you are if you're not available because you're hurt all the time.
Yeah.
The organization can't use you. After a while, they're just not going to renew your contract.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So availability. So durability equals availability.
I like that.
That one's Coach Patricia.
Well,
I don't want to take credit for it.
It's funny that you mentioned that, just because it was I mentioned earlier that I'm 27 now, and the year I was turning 25, so that when I was 24 turning 25, that was when everything really, that was the year I went pro, actually, and that was sort of when everything started to catch up with me, of like not eating good, not sleeping good, not recovering after practices. It's like your recovery slows down a bit, and you don't realize really how important that recovery aspect is, I think, until you get a little bit older and the body slows down a bit, like you alluded to, right?
Right.
But I got to ask before we get into some of the neurology stuff, because you brought up sleep a bit, and I'm a big advocate of a pregame nap. And I was just curious, if you think that's a good idea. How long before game time should you take one? How long should it be? Is it effective? What's sort of your take on that?
So is in the literature, and I always refer to the literature because, and I'll tell you when it's my opinion or
Yeah.
my experience versus what the science is saying. And it's kind of 50-50 in the science right now.
Yeah.
And I think just because access to the right demographics, I think it's different for every, population.
Yeah.
So when it comes to sports, and the thing with napping is, the good part about napping is we can sort of, use that. I mean, it's currency, right? So we can pay back that debt a little bit. But at the same time, nap is not a substitution for getting the proper amount of sleep. Now, the one problem with napping is you get into the sleep cycles. If you have to wake up in the wrong part of the sleep cycle when you're not in the awake cycle, that makes you initially a lot worse off performance-wise, groggy and stuff like that. So you don't want to nap up to the point where, okay, I got to get up and then get going. Now, game day is a little different because you're going to be woken up. At the hotel, you're going to have to get to the bus, or meal, the bus, all
Yeah.
that stuff. So you're still hours away from competition. So you'd be okay there.
Yeah.
But what you want to do is think of it like 15-minute cycles.
Got it.
And this is just generic. I mean, it's not specific to 15 minutes, but
Yeah.
you don't want if you're going to set your alarm, make sure you're doing it like either 15, 30, 45, or 60, things like that.
Yeah.
Try not to be in between those too much because you might be in not going through your awake cycle.
Mm.
Now, again, that's just very general because it could be 10 minutes for some individuals, but there's no way to know unless you monitor your sleep that way.
Yeah. Yeah. It's changed a bit for me over the years. Sometimes I do, and this was something, I can't remember what year this was actually. It might have been 2011. I went to like the USHL combine and somebody started talking about sleep and they're like, yeah, you sleep an hour and a half sleep cycles. So what I started doing was either having a 30-minute nap to be super quick, or I would, time it. My nap would be like an hour 45. So that way I could sort of get that hour and a half in. And that seemed to work well for me over the last decade plus, really. I mean, I've used it for a long time, but there are still some days where like it doesn't work out well and then you're kind of in a bad spot. So I usually like to nap, early on, like between 12 and 1. So that way that sort of gives you, if you wake up around 2, that gives you plenty of time before a 7 o'clock game to wake up, right?
Right.
Right. Now, prior to the call, you said you were very interested in the neurology and the psychology side behind recovery, and you've alluded to the parasympathetic nervous system. But what exactly did you mean when you said that, and why does that spark your curiosity?
Well, the more I learned about the effects of recovery, and as we kept peeling back the onion, and again, we're still peeling it back, but many people I work with and have collaborated with and so forth, what we found, because it wasn't just me, is that it's the brain. The brain is controlling everything, right?
Mhm.
So it's a very selfish organ. It's self-preservation. That's why when we go into shock, where all the blood goes to the center,
Yeah.
then it goes to the brain. When it comes to sugar, the brain wants the sugar. It's going to take it first. So it's a very selfish organ, right? Well, it's the same. It's what we've come up with is we have to take a brain first approach. The brain is affecting that physiology. So, what I've my kind of my philosophy is when I approach these things is the brain's perception is your body's reality.
Mm.
Okay, so if because people say, well, why are you so stressed? That's not stressful. This is it's all relative. If
Yeah.
if that person's brain perceives that the whatever the dog over there is a threat, even if it's not, the physiology is going to respond to it's a threat.
Right.
So they're going to get anxious and heart rate, respiration, all that stuff. So all those physiological things that are important for performance are all controlled by the brain's perception of the situation.
Yeah.
Whether you manufacture it or it sees it from a visual stimulus or whatever. So that's what was fascinating to me as that comes more and more in light, and again back to because I was like, if 15, 20 years ago if you said meditation to me, I'd be like,
Yeah.
no way, that's a hippie. um, and it's like it's really changed my perspective. Like, I can't deny the science.
Yeah. Yeah.
So and so your brain's perception is your body's reality. That's the bottom line.
Yeah. Yeah, and we mentioned that you've been working closely with the Rockefeller Neuroscience Institute, and you said your expertise in heart variability and the measure of the autonomic nervous system. Maybe you can just put that in layman terms for everyone, and what does that mean for us as athletes?
Sure. So your autonomic nervous system, that's really what's controlling your body without you thinking about it, right? So it's automatic,
Yeah.
being autonomic. Um, and there's one of the major pathways is the vagus nerve that goes from from your brain all the way into your intestines. So it's transmitting signals.
Hmm.
Okay, so if the fight or flight, that stress situation, well, you don't need to digest food, right? You don't need to do certain things. You need blood going to your muscles so you can get away or you can defend yourself. So the physiology changes, and that's transmitted through the vagus nerve. Um, so heart rate variability, what it does, it measures. We take the measurements between each consecutive heartbeat, and when you're relaxed or let's say balanced, it varies a lot. So like if we say, if you look in a heart monitor, it says 60 beats per minute. Well, that's not consistent because you look at it 2 minutes later, it might be 62, it might
Yeah.
be 64, it might be right. So what we're looking at is not necessarily the heartbeat, but the time sequence in between it.
Mm.
And when we become stressed in that fight or flight situation, it becomes more uniform, less variant. So, what the autonomic nervous system is going to respond. So that's how we're measuring the autonomic nervous system. So if we're stressed, we're going to have less variability. If we're balanced, more variability. If we're really relaxed, a lot of variability.
Yeah.
Now, the biggest question, when we start looking at this, globally is like, okay, what's good, what's bad?
Yeah.
And we know from a disease standpoint, like cardiologists and electrophysiologists, they're looking at heart rate variability from, a disease state. So, if your heart rate variability, you have heart condition problems, usually be consistently below 50 milliseconds all the time or whatever. And so that's what they use it for.
Yeah.
They don't use it for anything else. And then, psychologists are using it for biofeedback, just trying to get you relaxed, breathing. We know that your breathing rate influences that system. So they use it for that. But when we start looking at all these things, what we've discovered globally, different entities, is that it really comes down to your baseline.
Mm.
So whatever you are, and we say baseline. So if it's over time, maybe 14 days worth, what's your average heart rate variability at rest, and then if you deviate below that, then that's you want, like during a competition or event
Yeah.
training. If you're training and it lowers, that's supposed to, but it should come back to where your baseline was,
Right.
your normal average. And then in a sleep standpoint, when you wake up, it should be at your normal average, or you can measure it when you're sleeping, and that becomes your norm.
Yeah.
So that's what we found. It's really your deviation from normal that determines whether it's good or bad for you.
Yeah.
So if you have a heart rate variability of 110 and I have a heart rate variability of 80, yours isn't better than mine.
Right.
If, but if I don't come back up to my 80 after a couple minutes of, we did a few sprints and you came back to your 120, you're in better shape than I am,
Yeah. Yeah.
better recovered.
Now, why is measuring, that variability so important for athletes and performance?
Well, so twofold. One is that overall recovery, that readiness.
Right.
Are you ready to train at the intensity you need to? And you're not always going to be ready to train. And when you're not ready to train, you need to adjust that the intensity or the volume or the load, so you don't overtax it, because then you're just going to put yourself further in debt. But at the same time, that doesn't mean just take the day off.
Yeah.
What can you do to help pull that up so you can train harder, right? Because you can't do it. Train smarter, not harder, really doesn't work.
Yeah.
It was a good concept, meaning be mindful of how you train. Don't just do things. But really, it's you got to recover smarter so you can train harder.
Mm.
and that's really where you're gonna get it. So some days you may have to manipulate your training so it's not as intense, so it matches your readiness,
Yeah.
and so forth. But you have to kind of. It takes a little while to figure out what your readiness is, and there's technologies out there. Some are wearables that are good, some aren't as good, but there's ways to look at that, and there's a lot of companies trying to commercial companies trying to push that and help you come up with that for you.
Right. And why do you believe in that mantra so much? Recover smarter so you can train harder. And what advice do you have for people that might not be taking recovery too seriously?
Well, it's going to catch up with them.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, at the end of the day, here's the thing. You're 18, 19, 20, 21. You don't feel those effects. You go out, get drunk and train the next day, and you
Yeah.
just laugh about it. You hit 25, you can't do that anymore. All of a sudden, right?
No.
Oddly enough, 25 is when your body starts to decline.
Yeah.
It starts to, go the opposite direction in aging, and the fitter you are, the more recovered you are, the slower that decline is. Okay, so think of about like you're at the ATM or at your bank account. All right, so you're 18 years old, you've got $1 million, but instead of putting money back in when you get it, you just keep taking from that million. You get 25, and all of a sudden you're at $20. All right, but if you're 18 at $1 million and you take out 100, but you put back 100 or put back 150, you keep that bank account. So every time you train, every time you compete, every time you party, is a cost. And if you're not gonna put back into that bank account, at some point you're going to be depleted. It's going to be bankrupt.
Yeah. No kidding.
So think of it as your retirement. Start when you're young, and your retirement's going to last you a lot longer.
Yeah. I think a lot of people don't, when you're young and I've probably fallen into that trap a little bit. You just feel like you can battle through anything, short sleeps, tough weekends, whatever it is. But how exactly does, on a weekly basis, if you recover better, how exactly does that set you up for success come the weekends when we play?
Well, again, readiness, right? You're available, right? You're ready, and if you're playing, back to back, especially the collegiate athletes, Friday Saturday schedule, are you going to be just as ready Saturday after a Friday night?
Yeah.
And the more you do, the more you invest in during the week, you can handle those. So I'll give you an example on the tactical side that might bring it home a little bit better. Is listen, hey, before you're going to train or work out or whatever, we're going to warm up, right? We're going to go do dynamic warm up, do all these things, stretch, whatever, right? Because if you don't, you have this, fear of like, if you don't, you're going to get hurt or you're not going to be able to perform. But now let me give you a different scenario. You're flying in a helicopter for 3-4 hours with all your tactical gear, and you're cramped. There's no seats. You're just cramped up. And then it lands. You have to go out, and as soon as you hit it, you're working.
Yeah.
They didn't do dynamic warm up. They didn't stretch. They didn't do all this stuff. All right, and they don't get hurt. Musculoskeletal, don't get hurt. So why? Well, it's because of the prep they did. They were ready during the week. So when they were in that situation, they couldn't do those things. It didn't impact them as much as it would if they never prepped for it and try to do those things. They probably have a higher rate of injury.
Yeah.
So it's not to say that stuff's not good. It's just when it doesn't happen, if you planned and trained and recovered properly, it won't be an issue.
Yeah. Well, maybe you can touch on a bit on the idea, and we talked about this prior to the recording, but we need to listen to our bodies more. And you mentioned that we need to be reading the body and how we feel day to day after hard work. We need to check how the body's responding and maybe change our calendar and our schedule based on how we feel a bit. Why is that exactly? And what are some of the benefits and the drawdowns from doing that?
Well, I mean, so, the benefits, obviously it gets you into, it's personalized, right?
Yeah.
Every individual is different. So when we give you this one plan fits all, some people get no work, some people get a lot of overwork, and some people get just the right amount. So, when we look at this, you need to listen to your body, but you have to be honest, right? It's a mindset.
Mm-hmm.
All right. I don't feel like training versus my body's not ready to train are two different things. So you still have to pull yourself up by the bootstrap. You still have to go and do it.
Yeah.
You still have to be there, right? So it's a mindset that has to change on what it takes to be a performer and what it takes to be an elite performer.
Yeah.
So there's times that it's not always going to be fun, right? But at the same time, I've got to listen to my body. So I've got to be able to manipulate and modulate some things. And it may be timing, time of day and so forth that you have control of. The downside is you don't always have control of that. So if, where I really, my eyes were really opened up is when I went to the military side. It's like, yeah, this is all great. This says that, but I still got to go out the door. I got a mission.
Yeah.
So I'm going, whether I'm red, green, or yellow, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, then what? You can't, they have to go. They have to do this. They have to do that.
Yeah.
We can't dictate what time they can do it. So that's where it comes. It's very important that the time that you do control, that you get into that mindset of, I have to pay back the cost of doing business.
Mm.
And that's sleep, recovery, even nutrition. Okay. One of those things alone isn't really going to be like, if you have good nutrition, getting better nutrition isn't going to be significant.
Yeah.
But if you don't stay on task with that good nutrition, you're going to fall behind, and those other things won't be as effective.
Right.
And then, and so forth. So if you try and get better sleep, but you don't want to address your nutrition, you're probably not going to be able to improve your sleep.
Right.
Or recovery. So every piece is as important, to the puzzle. So if you're going to, if you can control your calendar, you want to control it where it's the benefit for you to be ready to perform at competition, whenever that competition is.
Mm-hmm. And for people maybe looking to implement this better into their summer programs or season routines, what exactly should they be looking for, and what exactly should they be doing when they feel a certain way?
Well, I think, again, the universal things that are available to people, you don't need to invest in this or that or buy this or buy that, because not everybody has the resources to do that. You can get yourself into a routine of, every time after, training, whether it's, your whatever type of training it is, doesn't matter. But in the summertime, okay, at the end, the trainer or the coach or the strength coach might have recovery stuff for you. But at home, you should still carve out some time and say, okay, I'm going to do my own personal recovery. So I'm either going to, close my eyes and meditate, or I'm going to close my eyes and I'm going to focus on my breathing in and breathing out, just regulating your breathing. Do that for just 20 minutes is going to help reset you for the next stage.
Wow.
You can, if you have resources, availability to go to, right now is not a great time for, in the pandemic, but they have these, float centers or cryo centers. You can take advantage of those, but you don't substitute it for something, right? You still go home, carve out your own time, even if you did it with the strength coach or the trainer or the physio, but still carve out your own time where you're by yourself for 20 minutes, and you can download a free app like Breathe to Relax or whatever to help you pace your breathing, and you get it down to 6-7 breaths per minute. Do that for 20 minutes. you will reset yourself regardless.
Very cool. I like that. Some other apps for some people listening are like Calm or
Yes,
Headspace
very good.
is another one that I use as well. Um, but yeah, it's crazy. I haven't heard many people talk about it on the recovery side. It's typically discussed and used as a tool to train focus, right?
Right. But it's the same concept,
Yeah.
right? For you to be focused and attention, we need to bring into a mindfulness state, in that moment. So, as I mentioned earlier, respiration or breathing heavily influences your autonomic nervous system
Mm,
and your heart rate variability.
hmm.
So by bringing, again, you're in control of your own physiology. So when things are going and all of a sudden, like, oh my God, this is, it's getting chaotic. Like if you're a goaltender, you took on this huge barrage and then now it plays down the other end. You're just trying to say, okay, well, all right, I just gotta get my mindset. If you just stop and just do a few quick, paced breathing, you'll automatically reset yourself for that next flurry.
Very cool.
It's something you can do in real time,
Yeah.
and it's something you can do post where you can reset yourself,
Yeah.
and it's free.
Yeah. Well, there's a little hack for everybody right there. Mark, do you have any last words of advice for everyone listening that you feel passionate about?
Well, I do. I mean, the biggest thing I think is like I said before, there's a cost of doing business. There's a cost when you train. There's a cost when you party. There's a cost when you do any physical activity. There's a cost of doing no activity.
Yeah.
So you have to be prepared to pay back that cost. And if you do, it will give you more longevity. Because even if you're not a professional athlete, if you're a high school athlete, or if you're just a recreational amateur athlete, like last thing you want to do is retire as a recreational athlete at 25, right? You want to be able to do activities, play with your kids when you get older,
Yeah.
and be active. The cost is now you got to put away for that retirement when you're in your teens.
Mm,
That would be my biggest advice. And then again, I'm going to go back to, the brain's perception is your body's reality.
yeah. Yeah, well, Mark, thank you for coming on the show, man. This was an absolutely fire conversation. It's been so awesome having you on, and it was a pleasure to meet you. I love talking about sports science stuff in particular. It really sparks a keen interest in me, as I know there's areas where a lot of other people aren't looking really, that I can get an edge on, that we can sort of provide my community a bit of an edge, and that's exactly why I brought you on here today, to enlighten everyone on recovery and how you can become more elite athletes, right? So can you just let my audience know where they can find you online?
Well, I really don't have an online presence. I'm not selling anything or
Yeah.
or anything like that. So unfortunately, I don't. I mean, you can pass along my contact information, my email, and so forth, if people want to get in touch with me.
Yeah.
But for the most part, I mean, if you check out, what they're doing at the Rockefeller Neuroscience Institutes, at West Virginia University in their medical school, that would be something. They're doing some great stuff out there. They're amazing group to work with. I'm blessed to be able to work with them.
Yeah.
So check them out.
Yeah. Well, Mark he's one of those heroes that doesn't wear a cape. And Mark, your work is I think undervalued really. But I'll include his email in the show notes, and if you guys have any more questions, you can reach out to him. But Mark is one of the leading sports scientists in North America, if not the world, on sleep and recovery. And definitely consider adding in more recovery into your routines, and listen to this episode back if you need to. Maybe somewhere down the road we'll have you back on the show, man, because I know you'll be continuing with your work if that's something that interests you.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I really appreciate you having me here, and I just want to thank your audience for listening to me, and then I want to thank all the folks that I work with and collaborate with, who actually are really the brains behind what I do at the both at the Rockefeller Neuroscience Institute, the DoD, and so forth. Some great people out there.
Right on. Well, I'm grateful for you coming on, Mark. You take care, and we'll chat soon, man.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning into this week's episode, guys. If you liked what you heard today, make sure to hit that subscribe button, as we have tons of amazing guests lined up ready to come onto the show in the next few months. Make sure to tune in next week and every Tuesday from now on at 8 a.m. as I have another active goaltender coming on the show, Matt Galida. 3-time ECAC champion with Cornell University. We just had Ben Sire on the show, but this is going to be a great follow-up to just a championship duo. You won't want to miss this one, so make sure to tune back next week. Without further ado, here are the giveaway details for the NeuroTracker X subscription we're giving away. To enter the giveaway, if you're an Apple user, simply go to the Apple Podcast app on your phone and leave us a written review and rating. And if you're an Android user, you can also download iTunes onto your computer, search the show, and leave a written review and rating on there as well. Once you leave a review of the podcast, take a screenshot of it and either email it to goaliehacks@gmail.com or DM me on Instagram with your screenshot and your full name. If you guys are also interested in getting started with the product, feel free to hit me up either by email or Instagram direct messages to get more details. Get excited, guys. Great things ahead. I hope you enjoyed today's show, and I'll see you next week.